any means you can imagine. They started with a comic. They have events. They have a radio station. They use SMS. They use social media, of course, Facebook and Twitter and so forth. And through that multimedia approach, they reach almost 6 million Kenyans and another 3 million young Tanzanians with their work.
It's staggering, isn't it? I mean, the scale is one of the things that really interests me about how the humanitarian sector has to operate. And I agree with you. The ability to be agile and use what you have is something that we in the private sector can definitely learn. But this ability to engage at scale, I think, will really surprise a lot of people.
Yeah. Let me add one more thing, Chris, here, since we're talking about scale. A number that hit me really hard is there's about 1.3 million Kenyans that are hitting the job market every year. 10%. Sometimes less than 10% will ever find formal employment. So 9 out of 10 of those young Kenyans hitting the job market every year know that they have very little chance, a slim chance to find formal employment. What typically happens is they have to find ways to hustle through life. They're often called the hustlers. And what we will discuss with Rob Burnett is they are building a workforce preparation program that they actually call the Hustler MBA, where they are trying to figure out what can an organization do to invest in the skills development of those non-formal or informal workplace workers, whether they become entrepreneurs or micro enterprises or just offer services on the street, you name it. It's a very unique way of workforce learning and preparation. And ultimately, they think and believe that kind of skills development will prepare them down the road for more formal employment as well, or set them up to set up their own organization. A very interesting question that I think we will unpack with Rob.
Well, look, it's great that we're going to Africa and we're hearing people from the global south. Any other people that you're hoping to hear from?
Yeah, the other group that I have in mind is actually 3 different people. It's Audrey Chen in Kenya, Kami Agon in South Africa, and Remy Gavayaka in Rwanda. And what we will discuss with them is what's really interesting to observe is the technology advancement in Sub-Saharan Africa has really happened. The economic development is very dynamic. In fact, right now, 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world happen to be in Africa. And the advancement in technical skills is quite dramatic as well. We talked about the high level of unemployment just a moment ago. And yet, when you talk about modern technical jobs, highly desirable, most of the companies, whether it's consumers of technology or technology companies themselves, will tell you it's super hard to find well-prepared, technically capable people. So what we will do in discussing to those 3, all 3 of them have invented very unique ways outside school to prepare the workforce of the future in technology for those attractive jobs that cannot be filled today, although youth unemployment is so high. And we will learn about app development stores, boot camps. In fact, with Remy, we will even talk about what you can do in a refugee camp, UN refugee camp in Dzaleka. And I think it will give us an idea how creativity can solve those immediate and future technology skills challenges in very unique ways.
This is it's exciting. I can't wait to hear from these people.
Let me add one more guest that I hope to invite, and that's an organization in South Africa called the Harambe Youth Employment Accelerator. And Harambe has been around also for about a decade. And what they are trying to do is to really directly deal with the problem of youth unemployment in South Africa, especially in the townships. By the way, a lot of people might not know that is because they expect different countries, but South Africa actually has the highest youth unemployment on the African continent. Over 50% South Africans cannot find a job. And so what Harambe has done is they teamed up with employers that are trying to fill entry-level jobs. It can be banks, it can be retailers, it can be service providers, it's all kind of organizations. And they work with them to understand what kind of skills profile is needed to fill the positions that they have and also build a career path And then Harambe goes back and translates that into a very unique short-term training approach that directly prepares those young people for the placement in the industry. And over the last couple of years, they actually managed to reach 600,000 people to train them in an online offline combined approach and put over 100,000 of people into interesting jobs. So hopefully we'll find out from Harambe on what they've done, how they use the data, how they use the blended learning approach to accomplish what I just described.
Yeah, really fascinating. You talk about like the use of data is incredibly strong in terms of measuring and showing impact. A lot we can learn around that too.
Exactly. But let me ask you, Chris, as I described the people that I was hoping to bring to the table and talk about is, but I know you also have a very interesting roster of participants in the podcast in mind that you want to interview.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really fascinated by this question about how learning works in the aid and humanitarian sector. And I've lined up a bunch of people who are going to give some context and some color and talk about a lot of techniques they're using around learning to build capacity. That's the language that I hear people in this sector use, the importance of building local capacity to solve problems, move people from poverty, out of poverty, to help people feed themselves and to improve their circumstances and situations, the kind of examples that you were sharing with us. So I'm super excited that Raj Kumar, who is the CEO and founder of an organization called DevEx, is going to open the series for us. He is a very smart guy, a Harvard-educated businessman who really has a passion for doing good in the world. And he's built an organization called DevEx that helps people get jobs in the sector, but it also provides a community to talk about the topics and trends of what's going on in the international aid sector. He has an amazing perspective, and we're just going to learn a lot about how the sector works, how it operates. It's $200 billion. There are new players coming into it, and there's a lot of disruption at work. So I think that's going to be a fascinating early episode to hear from Raj. We're also going to talk to a number of people who run programs that help either workers in local NGOs or workers in international NGOs get better at what they do. So we have Chris Prue from Humentum. We have the CEO of an organization called the Humanitarian Leadership Academy. And we have an organization called Tech Change, who will all be represented in shows and all talking about how they're using learning technology to create capacity at scale in these different populations. I also hope to talk to someone from the International Federation of Red Cross Red Crescent. They have a staggering 11 million volunteers that they train. And of course, it's probably one of the most incredible brands on the planet in terms of their neutrality and independence and their sort of mission of helping people originally in wars, but in all kinds of situations where healthcare is needed. So lots of really interesting people. I want to come at this question of how learning helps do good in the world from a number of different angles. And so I'm very excited about the lineup that we have, Lutz.
Yeah, I think listening to you is often those kind of initiatives, those innovations, the challenges fly a little bit under our radar screen, right? Because they're not on the forefront of our thinking. 11 million people around the world. Yeah, it's staggering, right? And so understanding what they do, or in the case that I described, is how do you reach 1 million young people, and you can't even rely on they have technology available so that you can connect with them. I think there's a lot of insight that we can garner and bring back to our situations, ours being as you live in Central Europe or you live in the US or Canada, and resources are almost unlimited. And yet we find it hard sometimes to make ends meet. Hopefully there will be a bit of a transfer of seeing as what happens if you are even more creative and learn from those situations where you can apply it to in your market, where the limit of the resource is not as pressing.
It's a couple of things. About a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, I took a group of chief learning officers from really, Fortune 100 companies with my friends from Deloitte. And we run a program where we get these kind of people together regularly and we learn from each other. And we'd organized a visit to the International Red Cross's headquarters in Geneva. And at the time, their headquarters was actually on the roof of IKEA in downtown Geneva. IKEA had donated this space while the International Federation's headquarters were being refurbished. And we had the most incredible week. First of all, the first few days of the week, we brought learning leaders from the various member organizations of the Federation. So people from Afghanistan, people from the US, people from all around the world who'd never been together, all learning leaders from that organization. So we had a fascinating time. And then we brought these international businesses, the chief learning officers in. And, the assumption was that this cadre of leaders from the private sector were going to help and teach and educate and help the International Red Cross move forward. And then at the end of the week, what was really amazing, and everybody in the room kind of felt it, was much of the value flowed the other way. We learned so much about how the humanitarian journey is a learning journey. That was direct from the Secretary General himself said that. We learned about the agility that people have to use in the field and the pressures under which they work. We learned about what's important and what's not important. And we learned really hard, concrete techniques and things we could do differently. So that's really my inspiration for this whole series. And I think it's going to be fun hearing from people. And I think information and learning can flow both ways.
That story really, really resonates with me, Chris. And it actually reminds me of another workforce development learning that I'd like to quickly share with you is part of what I did in my previous job at the For Africa Academy Dean is to create a volunteering program. It had a wonderful title of My Skills for Africa, and it invited, and it's still ongoing, Microsoft employees from around the world to donate their time and energy and skills to come to the African continent and support and help. But it was specifically in the skills that they were good at. So it wasn't a volunteering that you often see as we help the school here with meals, or we paint a church with a new paint of color, and you name it. But it was really in the core capabilities. So we brought in data scientists, developers, of course, salespeople, HR people. In fact, Chris, if I may share that, you yourself volunteered as well. And you sure did. I think you went to Ethiopia, if I remember correctly.
I sure did. I went to Ethiopia Telecom and I helped them build an online learning academy. This is really amazing.
Exactly. And what was really interesting to see, and that's why your story so much resonated with me, we very quickly discovered that it became a two-way street. Obviously, the idea was to bring those Microsoft experts from around the world to help either customers or partners or NGOs and other organizations on the continent, and that typically always took place. But also what happened was, and that was a little bit more than we expected, is that our employees came back and said, you know what, this was an unbelievable experience and actually learned so much, because I had to challenge myself. I had to actually now suddenly work in an environment that I'm not familiar with. I suddenly had to put hands-on solutions in place where I'm normally just designing them and so forth. So that kind of workplace learning for the Microsoft employees coming to Africa turned out to be as important and as meaningful as the contribution that those employees made to the customers and NGOs and partners on the continent.
And this is one of the fundamental shifts, Lutz, that's going on, I think, in this sector, this shift away from a mindset where it's about charity or helping victims and bringing expertise from the West to solve the problems of the global South. And the shift is towards how do we build capacity in local actors. It's a much more empowerment-based philosophy. And when you recognize that the value flows both ways in this exchange, really great things start to happen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And if you want to kind of transport what you just said, an observation that I fully share with, a little bit on a kind of a almost philosophical level, I'm currently reading a book called Afrotopia by a guy from Senegal.